The sound of the final school bell drifted through the hallways like a sigh of relief. Lockers slammed, laughter echoed. And the energy of another day faded into soft footsteps disappearing down the corridor. Inside room 204, the world grew quiet. The sunlight stretched lazily across the rows of empty desks, dust floating like golden snow. Miss Claire Dawson stood by the window, her fingers lightly resting on the sill, watching the last few students spill out into the courtyard below. She loved this hour, the hush after the storm of voices. It was her time to breathe, to think, and to wonder if this calm was peace or just silence filling an empty space inside her. For 8 years, Claire had taught English at Maplewood High to everyone else. She was the kind of teacher who seemed effortlessly composed, graceful, patient, always prepared. The one who smiled even when she was exhausted, who listened when no one else did. But behind that calm exterior lived a quiet ache she could never quite name. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like a whispering, unspoken longing that surfaced in quiet moments like this. Maybe it was the dream she had once carried to write, to travel, to live beyond these 4 walls filled with textbooks and essays. Or maybe it was the simple yearning to feel seen, not as Ms. Dawson, but as Claire. The room smelled faintly of chalk and old books, familiar and comforting, yet tonight it made her feel like she was living inside a memory. She leaned over her desk, straightening papers that didn't need straightening, trying to quiet her thoughts. That's when she noticed someone still sitting in the back row, Ethan Miller, 18. Quiet, observant, the kind of student who didn't draw much attention but never failed to surprise her in subtle ways. His essays were thoughtful, sometimes painfully honest. Like he wrote not for a grade but because he needed to put his heart somewhere. He was staring at his notebook, motionless, as if frozen in a thought he couldn't escape. "Ethan," Claire said gently. "Class ended 10 minutes ago." He looked up, startled, then offered a half smile. "I know. I just needed a second." Claire hesitated, unsure whether to leave him alone or stay. Something in his tone carried a quiet pull that drew her curiosity. She moved closer, her voice soft. "Everything all right?" He nodded, though his eyes said otherwise. "Yeah, just thinking about what?" Ethan shrugged, then tapped his pen on the desk. "Life, I guess. The usual stuff." He gave a faint laugh, but it sounded hollow. "You ever feel like you're walking in the right direction, but still lost?" The question caught her off guard. It wasn't what students usually ask their teachers. For a moment, she didn't know how to answer. Her eyes drifted to the window again, to the fading sky outside. "More often than you'd think," she said quietly. He studied her face then, as if trying to read between her words. And something shifted in the air, an invisible understanding between two people who both knew what it felt like to chase meaning in the middle of ordinary days. Claire smiled faintly. "Why do you ask?" Ethan sighed. "I don't know. I just feel like everyone around me already knows who they are. I'm still figuring it out. And the more I try, the less sure I get." His honesty touched her. He wasn't being dramatic. He was just being human. And that simple truth stirred something in Hertha. Same feeling she had buried beneath her. Calm routines. She sat on the edge of her desk, folding her hands. "You know, when I was your age, I thought certainty was everything. I believed you had to know exactly who you were and where you were going. But the truth is," she paused, searching for the right words, "sometimes not knowing means you're still open, still alive enough to grow." Ethan listened closely, the kind of listening that made silence feel sacred. "Maybe," he said softly, "that's what scares me." "What does?" "The growing." His words hung in the air, fragile and true. For a moment, Claire forgot the ticking clock, the ungraded papers, the endless to-do list. There was just the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the late afternoon light painting the walls in gold, and the quiet realization that this conversation was different. It wasn't about literature or grammar, it was about life, and both of them were still trying to write their own versions of it. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway. breaking the stillness. Claire glanced at the clock. "You should probably head home, Ethan," she said gently. He nodded, gathering his books. But before he left, he turned back, his voice low but sincere. "Thanks, Miss Dawson, for listening." She smiled, though something in her chest felt heavier now. "Any time, Ethan." When he walked out, the room fell silent again, but not the same kind of silence as before. This one carried something unspoken, something that lingered. Claire sat there for a long time after he left, looking at the empty seat where he'd been. She didn't know why that small exchange felt important, only that it did. The golden light faded to dusk, shadows stretching across the floor, and for the first time in a long while, Claire wondered what her own life might look like if she dared to ask the same question Ethan had. Asterisk. Do you ever feel like you're walking in the right direction, but still lost? Asterisk. The thought echoed softly in her mind, gentle, haunting, and strangely beautiful. And that was how it began, the moment that would change both of their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. That evening, long after the classroom had gone dark and the hallways had emptied, Claire sat by her window at home. The city hummed faint beneath the drizzle of spring rain. She had opened her laptop to grade essays, but the papers remained untouched. Her mind wandered back to the quiet moment after class, to Ethan's question, to the way his words had lingered in the air like music that refused to fade. It had been years since something so simple had stirred her like that. Not because of who said it, but because of what it reminded her of, a time when she, too, had once spoken with that kind of hope. Her eyes drifted toward the small box on the corner of her bookshelf, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were pieces of another life, faded photographs, postcards, and folded letters that carried the faint scent of ink and memory. She hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, at the very top, was a postcard of the Oregon coast, cliffs and mist, waves curling like whispers, and in neat handwriting on the back, the words she had never forgotten, greater than asterisk, someday. When you're ready to stop waiting and start living, meet me where the sea meets the sky. Asterisk. A soft smile touched her lips. The handwriting belonged to Daniel Hart, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She had met him during her first year of teaching, back when everything felt new, uncertain and thrilling all at once. He wasn't a colleague, but a writer who came to speak at a local book event. Claire had gone reluctantly, urged by a friend who thought she needed a night away from lesson plans and faculty meetings. She remembered the moment vividly. The soft glow of cafe lights, the scent of roasted coffee, the quiet hum of people listening to Daniel read from his book about second chances. His voice was warm, steady, filled with the kind of sincerity that made every word feel true. After the event, she had stayed behind, standing by the shelf, pretending to browse. He noticed. "You're the only one who didn't ask for a signature," he said, smiling. Claire had laughed softly. "Maybe I wanted a conversation instead." He grinned. "That's rarer and better." Began so gently, conversations about books, letters that came every few weeks, and the rare afternoons when they met at the same cafe. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed. Just two souls who found comfort in each other's quiet company. But life, as it often does, had its own timing. Daniel received an offer to travel overseas for his next project, a dream he couldn't turn down. He had asked her to come with him once, half joking, half hoping. She had smiled, saying she couldn't leave her students, her classroom, her safe little world. He had understood, or at least pretended to. Their letters continued for a while, then slowly faded. The distance became more than miles. It became silence. Now, sitting by her window years later, Claire could almost hear his laugh again, the soft, easy kind that filled the spaces her own quietness couldn't. She could see the way he used to watch the rain and say, asterisk, "It's the sky teaching us to let go." Asterisk. And she wondered, not for the first time, what might have been different if she had chosen to follow instead of stay. A drop of rain slid down the glass, mirroring the slow ache in her chest. Her phone buzzed gently beside her. A message from a colleague about tomorrow's staff meeting. The world always kept moving forward, indifferent to the moments that made hearts pause. Still, something about Ethan's words from earlier echoed through her asterisk. You ever feel like you're walking in the right direction, but still lost? Asterisk, maybe the question had reached her so deeply because it came from a place. She once knew that space between courage and comfort. Between dreaming and doing, she looked down at the postcard again, tracing the edge with her fingertip. The ink had faded, but the feeling hadn't. Someday, she whispered, repeating Daniel's words. Maybe someday never really ends. The rain began to ease, leaving behind a thin mist that blurred the city lights. She stood, walked to her desk, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. For years, she had written only for lesson plans, essays, and report cards, but now her fingers longed to write something else. She began with a single line. Greater than asterisk, Dear Daniel, I don't know if this will ever reach you. Asterisk then stopped. She smiled faintly and folded the page away. Maybe it wasn't about sending it. Maybe it was about remembering that part of herself, the woman who had once believed that stories and souls could find each other across distance and time. The clock ticked softly in the background, and the room felt both full and empty at once. Claire closed the box gently, returned it to the shelf, and stood in the middle of her small apartment. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled faintly, then faded into the sound of rain once more. The past still echoed, not painfully, but tenderly, like a song that had ended but left its melody behind. And as she turned off the light and walked toward bed, she realized something. The part of her that had loved, hoped, and dreamed was not gone. It had simply been waiting quietly for the right moment to be remembered. Spring arrived with the scent of lilacs and the hum of new beginnings. The school hallways were once again filled with chatter, laughter, and the rhythm of everyday life. To anyone passing by, Miss Claire Dawson looked exactly the same, calm, composed, her usual warmth shining through as she guided her students through essays and literature. But inside, something had shifted. Ever since that afternoon conversation with Ethan, she had started looking at the world with quieter attention at the faces around her, the stories and their silences. And in those quiet hours after class, she often found herself thinking not only of Ethan's question, but also of Daniel, and the postcard that had never truly left her heart. It had been years since she last saw him. She sometimes wondered where he was now, if he still wrote, if he still believed in meeting where the sea meets the sky. That question was about to find its answer in the most unexpected way. It was a Thursday afternoon when the principal stopped by her classroom door. "Claire," he said with a smile, "you'll be glad to hear we have a guest speaker for next week's literature seminar. You might remember him, Daniel Hart, the author who used to live here years ago." For a moment, the world seemed to still. She nodded politely, keeping her expression calm. "Yes," she said softly, "I remember." When the principal left, she sat in her chair for a long moment, staring at nothing. The name stirred 1,000 small memories. Laughter in cafes, letters in careful handwriting. The ache of choices that had once felt final. Now, after all this time, fate had quietly folded the distance between them again. The day of the seminar arrived like a page she wasn't sure she was ready to read. The auditorium buzzed with students and teachers, the air warm with anticipation. Claire stood near the back, hands clasped, her heartbeat steady but noticeable dot. When Daniel walked onto the stage, time didn't rush backward. It simply softened. His hair was streaked with gray now, but his smile carried the same calm sincerity she remembered. He began to speak about writing, about how stories can save us, how they hold the versions of ourselves we're afraid to lose. His voice was steady, thoughtful, and filled with quiet wisdom. But every so often, his gaze drifted toward the crowd, and for a fleeting second, her eyes met. It was like the years folded into that single glance, not longing, not regret. Just recognition, the kind that only two people who once shared an unspoken connection could understand. When the talk ended, applause filled the room. Daniel stepped down, greeting a line of students eager to ask questions. Claire hesitated by the doorway, unsure whether to leave or stay. Then, As if sensing her hesitation, Daniel looked up and smiled. "Claire Dawson," he said, his tone warm and familiar. "I thought that was you." She returned his smile, gentle but unsure. "It's been a long time." "It's too long," he said softly. They found a quiet corner near the window, away from the noise of the students. The afternoon light fell across the floor in soft stripes, just like it had in her classroom years ago. "You still teach?" he said, glancing at the books in her hands. "Still do," she replied. "And you still writing?" He nodded. "Always. Though now I write more about people than places. The small, quiet moments, the ones we overlook until they're gone." Claire smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." There was a comfortable pause between them. They didn't rush to fill it. They never had. "I always wondered if you got my last letter," he said finally. "The one I sent from the coast." She shook her head gently. "No, the last one I received had your words about the sea and the sky. I kept it." Daniel's eyes softened. "Then that one must have been enough." For a moment, silence spoke more than words ever could. The years between them didn't feel heavy. They felt tender, like pages of a story that had simply paused instead of ending. "I used to think about that night," Claire said quietly. "The one when you said I should stop waiting and start living." "Did you?" he asked. She smiled. "Eventually. I think it just took a while to understand what living meant." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it just means being brave enough to stay when leaving seems easier." Their eyes met again, and Claire felt something gentle stir. Not the fire of old romance, but the warmth of gratitude. For what was, what wasn't, and what still might be in a quieter form. Outside. The rain had started again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. Daniel glanced toward the window. "Still raining even after all these years," he said. Claire chuckled softly. "You always did think the rain was poetic." "Still is," he said with a small smile. "Only now I think it's less about letting go and more about remembering that we once cared enough to hold on." The bell rang in the hallway. Distant but grounding. She stood, smoothing her skirt, her heart steady now. "I'm glad you came back, Daniel. The students will learn a lot from you." He looked at her, the kindness in his eyes unchanged. "Maybe I already did." And just like that, the years between them felt lighter, not erased, but healed. That night, as Claire closed her classroom for the day, she noticed something on her desk, a note in familiar handwriting. "Greater than asterisk for Ms. Dawson. Thank you for teaching us that stories don't always end. Sometimes they just find new chapters." Asterisk, she smiled, her eyes misting. The past had found its way back. Not to repeat itself, but to remind her that every heart, no matter how quietly it beats, still has room for new beginnings. The next few days passed, with the quiet rhythm of spring returning to Maplewood High. The lilacs outside the windows had begun to bloom, their soft fragrance drifting into Claire's classroom every morning. Life, it seemed, had fallen back into place, but something inside her hadn't. Something was quietly awake now. Daniel's visit had stirred memories and emotions she thought had long settled into the past. But it wasn't regret that filled her. It was gratitude and a strange, peaceful ache that reminded her of what it meant to truly feel alive. That Friday afternoon, the halls began to empty for the weekend. Students rushed out, calling goodbyes, the air full of chatter and spring sunlight. Claire lingered at her desk, packing her things slowly. She was just about to lock up when she noticed someone standing at the doorway. It was Ethan. He looked hesitant, as if deciding whether to speak or turn away. "Ms. Dawson." She smiled. "Hey, Ethan. No after-class questions today." He chuckled softly, stepping closer. "Actually, maybe one." She leaned against her desk, curious. "All right, then. What's on your mind?" He hesitated for a long moment before speaking. "You remember when I asked you if you ever felt lost, even when you were doing everything right?" "I do," she said gently. He nodded. "I think I finally understand what I meant that day." Claire tilted her head, listening. I've been accepted into the art program, he said quietly. The one I told you I'd never have the courage to apply for. Her eyes lit with warmth. Ethan, that's wonderful. You did it. He smiled, but his voice softened. Yeah, but it's not just about art. It's about not being afraid to start, even if it's uncertain. She felt something shift in her chest, pride, affection, and the kind of joy that only comes when a teacher realizes she's made a small difference in someone's story, he continued. Glancing down, I think the reason I stayed after class that day wasn't just to ask about life. I think I needed someone to remind me it's okay to be scared. Claire's voice was quiet. We all need that reminder sometimes. He nodded, then looked up at her, his expression sincere. You changed more than my grades, Miss Dawson. You changed how I see myself. The words hit her like a soft wave, unexpected but deeply moving. She smiled, her eyes glistening. Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know. He hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his backpack. Before I go, I wanted you to have this. It was a drawing. Her classroom bathed in sunlight, the window open, papers fluttering on the desk. And by the window stood a woman calm, reflective. With light in her eyes, it's how I'll remember your class, he said simply. She couldn't speak for a moment. The drawing was beautiful, not just in detail, but in feeling. When she finally found her voice, it trembled just slightly. You have a gift, Ethan, and not just for art. You see people, that's rare. He smiled, and for a second, she saw the young dreamer he truly was, ready to face the world. Thank you for listening, he said softly, for believing in me when I didn't. And with that, he turned to leave. Claire stood in the doorway, watching him walk down the hall. She felt an ache in her heart, the kind that comes from saying goodbye not just to a student, but to a moment that had meant something more. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Claire found herself at the small park near the river, the same place where Daniel had once read to a crowd all those years ago. She didn't expect to see him, but there he was, sitting on a bench with a notebook in hand, sketching the water. When he noticed her, he smiled. Seems we both like quiet places. She laughed softly. Old habits. He gestured to the seat beside him. Care to sit? For a while, they didn't speak. The river moved gently, the air soft and cool. Finally, Daniel said, It's strange. I came back here thinking I'd feel like a stranger, but somehow it feels like coming home. Claire looked at him, her voice calm. Maybe that's because some stories never really end. They just find their way back when we're ready to hear them again. He smiled, looking out at the water. You always had a way with words. She shook her head gently. No, I just finally learned to listen to others and to myself. The silence between them was full, not empty, a silence of peace. After a while, Daniel stood, slipping his notebook closed. Well, he said softly, if you ever decide you're ready to start living the stories you used to teach, the coast is still there. So am I, Claire smiled, neither promising nor refusing. Maybe someday, she said. He nodded, understanding. Then, with a gentle wave, he walked away down the quiet path. Claire remained on the bench, watching the last streaks of sunlight ripple across the river. She felt the soft ache of endings, but also the calm beauty of beginnings. She thought of Daniel, of Ethan, of the young woman she once was, and the one she had become. Some stories, she realized, aren't about falling in love. They're about learning how to stay open to it, even after the world has changed. The river shimmered in the fading light. And she whispered to herself, greater than maybe we're all just meant to teach what we most needed to learn. And as the evening settled around her, Claire smiled, peaceful, grateful, and quietly free. Some people come into our lives just to remind us of what we forgot how to dream, how to believe, how to begin again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who once made a difference in yours. And remember, sometimes the quietest moments change everything.